when I'm talking about hopefully Mike changes, I think it has to have shaken you to your core to have failed that miserably at anything that you care about, that you are all in on. And we've all had failures in our life. We've all had successes and everything in between. And anything that is an overriding failure, an absolute, not debatable nightmare of a result, it forces you inward. It forces you to really think about what you believe, how you think things should operate. It forces you to take a good long look at your relationship with those that are part of that entity, that thing that failed. And that's why I would like to see a version of Mike that is a little bit more, I don't know how to say this without it being disparaging, without it being a referendum on Mike, because I like Mike, and I'm on the record of saying I like Mike a lot. I think Mike was such a young head coach. I can say this now as a man in my 50s, watching people go from their late 30s into their early 40s, except for Tom. Tom is like the oldest 38-year-old in the history of people. But like, and Tom was that way at 28. So, and that's a compliment to you. You have older siblings, and I know people like you who are old souls, as they say.
Still immature as hell in my 20s, though. But yes, for different reasons.
Everybody is to a certain extent, but it's all relative. You were not immature in the sense that most people are immature in their 20s. Anyhow, you remember early on when Mike got the job, there were so many things that we liked, but I remember saying at the time, yeah, he's a little immature. He's a little immature. Now, that too is relative. I don't mean immature as in he's 14 and thinks he knows everything about the world. I see that every day in my household. But when you're 38 or 41 and you behave a certain way that is not befitting of the position that you now hold, that can be perceived a little bit as immature. I'll give you a good example. The celebration over the blocked extra point against LSU is a moment of sort of coaching immaturity, where it's almost like he's in shock they got lucky enough to win a game that he just tried to blow. And when you watch that, you're like, he's got some growing up to do, man. This is the first game of the year, and they just tried to screw a game up that they had masterfully put together for 3.5 quarters. And his reaction maybe shouldn't be jumping on the shoulders of his special teams coach. It should perhaps be that of stoicism, thinking about how badly we screwed this process up and how to fix it. Be happy for your players, but you get the drift. You get what I'm saying about the way you comport yourself as you go through more situations, as you learn from mistakes, and as you gain perspective from your successes as well, and everything in between. And so I think when I'm critical of Mike as being a little bit immature as a coach, I'd like to see a more authentic version of Mike, because we have seen it, and I've spoken to the version of Mike that the press doesn't always get to see. I feel like Mike is a bit theatrical sometimes at the dais or in his interactions with players and media when the cameras are on. And I'd like to see a version that is much more at peace.
Yeah.
You see where I'm going with this?
Oh,
yeah.
I do. The post game from the Florida game this year was him, a pissed off, honest, raw Mike.
Yeah.
When he was talking about how they're going to fix things, like instead of, well, it's very disappointing and we didn't want to get that result. He was darting daggers across the press room, and not at the media, just at life, because he was so mad about how the thing was screwed up. And you see the competitor that we get to see in practice a lot of the time, but you see the competitor
love that version
and say, we're going to get this thing fixed and it's going to be fast. I'm telling you, this is going to be quick and we're going to get it done. That was him, but that's not him sending a message to players to get them on the right path or to boosters to get them to donate. That was a pissed off competitor that was letting it air out in that moment. And I found that refreshing. Absolutely.
Yeah, I find it refreshing too. And there's a reason you found it refreshing, because it was the genuine article and it's not always on display. And so to me, I think it's important that version of Mike, now it might be hard to come by because you just went 2-10. and you're under a lot of pressure, and pressure does change a man. And you do see the way that people handle pressure typically isn't all that flattering. Usually it is that of somebody searching and latching on and looking for what's true. And it can be unsettling to watch from afar at a distance where when you're watching it, you're not under those same pressures, and you can see what they're doing to that person. And you want so badly. It's not our role and it's not my place. It would be if it was you, just like it would be if it were me and you were wanting to talk to me. We're boys. I would pull you aside and say, Tommy, I want to talk to you for a second about something that I've noticed. You know what I mean? Just like you might do the same if it were me. But that's not our role as a press with Mike. None of us have it like that with Mike. Not that we shouldn't. But I've seen the very grounded, authentic, relaxed, no need to put on airs version of Mike.
Yeah.
And it's eminently likable. And it's also something I think people respond to.
A lot of the times it's the breakout with the local media, the ACC kickoff before the day even starts. He'll sit down at a table like he did a couple of years ago, and he's just going to shoot from the hip. And yet, look, nobody's perfect, but it's a lesson that my mom imparted to me a long, long time ago. She has a tremendous work ethic. And she said, you might feel, and you'll see this it was before I took my first job, you'll find that there are a lot of people in the workplace, and it could be in a corporate setting, or it could be at a movie theater, or it could be at a golf course where I was working, that think they're getting over on the system by not doing their job. But once you realize that the effort it takes to not do the job is actually more than getting it done, you will find the ethic necessary. And the reason I'm bringing that up is, well, first of all, it's great advice, but Dan Campbell, when he approaches the podium, has nothing to hide. Now, he's not a perfect coach because he'll take chances, or he'll play his starters to the hilt last night for some sense of what I don't understand. I'd rather have them prepared for Minnesota, but he's going to be who he is. And so anytime you ask him a question at the dais, he doesn't have to put on this governor system where he's like, well, what we were trying to do. He's like, no, here's how it is. And I'm super pissed off about that. It's probably the easiest thing in the world for Dan Campbell to do a press conference because he knows I'm just going to be honest with people. And I don't need to govern, and I don't need to think about the political implications of what I'm saying or how is this going to be perceived. And Mike will go back and forth on that. It's not the easiest thing in the world to handle because, especially as a college football coach, you're always speaking to boosters and donors. So you need to be aware of what you're saying. I'm not saying that you always have to have no filter, but you can tell there's a difference between when a Dan Campbell speaks and when somebody like Coach Norvell will speak at a given podium. He has prepared remarks and he's got a thing that he wants to go and say, whereas some coaches will tell you, look, man, what do you want to know? This is how it's going to be. Or I'm not going to reveal that, but I'm not going to try and dance around the subject. It's easier to just go straight to the point than it is to give you 60 words when 5 will do.
Yeah, you're trying to carefully state something that sends a message to the players, will be consumed by the press properly and then disseminated in the way that you want, that will also resonate with boosters and alumni and supporters of any kind, that also strike the right chord with the administration and the athletic director. And it is a tough balancing act, but the easiest way, and your mother's advice was good, the easiest way to have all of those boxes checked is to just be who you are and to be very genuine in that process. Because I think at its core, Mike's values in terms of coaching and teaching young men and that center around football are really well adjusted. I think they come from a good place. I believe that's who he is. If I didn't, I'd say that. Now, there are other aspects of Mike that I think he's putting on airs, and I wish that he wouldn't because I don't think it's necessary. But I understand how and why it would have happened.
Yes. Well, because you see a lot of people in your industry get burned for being too honest. I get it. And you don't want that to happen to you. And I just want to clarify here, because when he's on the practice field, this this is all the things that we're talking about, consistency of work ethic.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
not worrying about what he says to the second receiver on the depth chart because he would be fearful of how he perceives that.
Correct.
It's a different arena.
Yeah.
But it would, it would help if some of those pressers that we've seen where he's just straight ahead about it, he would, how much mental energy he'd gain back instead of like trying to prop stuff up. If he was just like, I don't know, that was just garbage. I wish we'd be better at this.
Yeah, and I think it's important too because there's a connection. I still think that it can hurt you with players if there's even an aspect of what we're talking about that is seen by those players because they know what you're saying. They know the guy that they see at practice every day. And so if you see some other version of that guy, then you can perceive that as duplicitous. And I don't, to me, I think you should get more comfortable in your skin as your coach. I'm not telling you what he is as a husband. I don't know. I'm not telling you what he is as a best friend. I don't know that. I'm not telling you what he is as any of these other things that we all are in our walks of life. I just know the guy that I see as a head coach, and I'd love for him, and it's awfully hard to do after going 2-10. I'd really love to see him find comfort in that skin. Like, just look, man. Be that guy that the players gravitated towards right off the bat and that got this turned around, and be that guy that had a mode of doing things and a consistency of message. Just slowly wean off the over-the-top preacher stuff.
Right. Yeah. Well, look, back in the day in the in-state rivalry that everybody loved between Bowden and Spurrier, they were who they were.
Right.
Both of them. Now, they were very different.
Right.
But they were who they were. And Steve never feared a press conference, and Bobby never feared a press conference. But they were the genuine article, and they were
genuine.
Very different characters. I mean, you think about Mike's best moment at the dais has to be the 0-4 response press conference. And yeah, he did launch into preacher mode a little bit when he responded on that, but it's coming from a place of belief. It's coming from a place of passion, belief that the work is going to pay off eventually. And that was the coda of what he was saying there was, I know that this works. I get that this works. There was a different ignition behind his eyes when he was speaking about that because he believed it. Instead, a great example is when we're talking about injuries. And I get that they have a policy, and until gambling forces the hand of the ACC as a league to say that you need to disclose things, I suppose they don't have to. But does it really hurt when you're 2-9 and the parents know and the family know that a guy's not available, that he's not going to play this weekend? I mean, is that like you're spending so much energy trying to not have that come out? It feels like inefficiency. You might as well just say, well, you don't have to say what's the difference, but you could just say, I don't know that we're going to have him this weekend.
Yeah.
Rather than, well, he's moving along, we're assessing things, and I'm like, all right, man, it just seems like a whole lot of work to say, we'll see.
I guess, and to put a ribbon on this, people might be wondering why I'm addressing this. Well, we're looking back at this past year. There are levels to the failure. There are lots of things that didn't go as we thought they could and didn't go as planned, certainly for him. And then there are aspects of the change that's forthcoming that we're obviously trying to take a peek into that window. And I just talked about how Gus Malzahn no longer being a head coach and being solely responsible for the offense might free him up to be an even more creative version of what he already was because he doesn't have any of these other responsibilities. Well, I think that's applicable to Mike Norvell. Now, Mike Norvell's under a lot of pressure. He's the head coach. He makes the lion's share of the money, and he's a guy that just went 2-10 and can't afford to have a bad season, or he won't be here next year, at the end of next year. But no longer having to worry about the offense, no longer having to worry about calling plays, no longer having to worry about certain aspects of the program in which you're running around constantly putting out fires, and solely looking at governing from a place on high, because you've now brought in a coordinator that you trust implicitly, as I've pointed out, and you've turned over your defense to a much more aggressive approach, which is something you've stated publicly, meaning Mike Norvell has stated publicly you want to see. You want a much more attacking style of defense. Okay, so now you've handed the reins over to an entire different group of coaches on that side of the ball. You've now brought in your mentor, one of your mentors, to run the offense, who you know you're going to give total control to. That frees you up to see all of this operation through a different lens and to play a different role. That's what I was getting at. And I would think that that would be freeing despite the weight and the magnitude of the pressures that are going to be on him this year after that season. That's all what this conversation really was about.
Yeah, I would agree with you. You've got, and that's where you can set the direction of things, and you can be it's not an easy thing. Making it sound easy, it's not an easy line to walk because
No, he may fail. It may not work.
Well, and also when you're trying to message, I mean, you are speaking to 5 different groups all at once. You're speaking to fans, you're speaking to boosters, you're speaking to administrators and players, and you're speaking to maybe the collective, to more than 5 recruits, high school coaches. Yep. I mean, there's your own roster because you're afraid that they're going to leave. There are so many things that you need to consider at any given moment. So it's not easy, but you're right. He should have more time to think about how you're going to set the agenda. And that can be from the podium, and that can be just whatever organizational meetings you have behind the scenes while they're going through install and on offense, and down the hall over there, they're going through install on defense. I can think about the operation and yes, how we're gonna govern everybody's day.
Yeah, I certainly hope I would say this to him. You almost want to put your arm around him in this instance. I'd say, hey man, the bulk of your career has shown you to be an elite coach. You're an elite coach who had a terrible year. That's all this is. You're an elite coach that had a terrible year. Happens. I can give you countless examples of great coaches, historically great coaches, who've had awful years. Bill Belichick being one of them, the most recent example. It's happened. It can happen to anybody. That you cannot get hung up on that, because if you look at the rise, your meteoric rise of your career, look at what you were. You were immediately identified, including by the man that you've brought in to be your OC, as a rising star in the business. And it's why you got opportunity after opportunity, because you earned it. And then you did the most with it. When you got the chance to call plays, you had success, which led to you getting a permanent gig as an OC, which then led to you eventually getting a permanent gig as a head coach. And you had success at Memphis, which got you the job at Florida State. And then you turned Florida State around. So when you walk through those doors, do so with an air of confidence born out of success after success after success, not the singular awful failure that was this past year.
Yeah, he's got a little bit of ruthlessness in him that you don't often see when the cameras are rolling for a press conference. Now, again, the Florida game, post-game, you saw a little bit of it. But you think about Kenny Dillingham, his top assistant, who was Gus's offensive coordinator in 2019. And Kenny, we forget that part of it, but Kenny came here from the 2019 Auburn Tigers to become our offensive coordinator. Mike has that brutal, blunt honesty in him. It happened a couple times this year in practice where you said, woo, well, Mike, we have angry Mike Norvell here.
Yeah.
I think that's more in his nature. Not that he always has to wear the
I agree with you.
hat.
Tom, I agree with you.
And I wouldn't mind hearing that on a Monday press conference or after a Tuesday practice that sucked, and we don't need to say it was a good work day. Like we could call it for what it is. Yeah.
Buddy, we've summarized what I was trying to get at. It's Jeff Cameron Show 93.3, Real Talk Radio, Warchant TV. But what a cool opportunity it is for Florida State to kind of reinvent itself, or for Mike to reinvent the way he goes about the operation. We don't know if this is going to be the beginning of a very long run of success, and that we look back at the previous year that we've talked a lot about on today's show, the New Year's Eve edition of the Jeff Cameron Show. We don't know if it's the moment we're going to look back on and see as a blip on the radar, and that, wow, can you believe that happened? Well, it's a good thing that it did, because it turned out to be this, and this after the fact. Or whether or not it was the beginning of the end. So we'll all go into this sort of eyes wide open, wondering what that's going to be. And I was mentioning a couple segments ago about how we'll assess spring. And I I don't know how any of us will really know how the pieces are going to fit on game day. We'll be able to assess segment groups. We'll be able to assess the overall talent of a certain group to some extent. To some extent, we learned that we can have the wool pulled over our eyes because it's obviously us against us in these practices. So you don't really know at the end of the day. And there was some allowance for that before, but to the degree that you could be so wrong, or that I could be so wrong, or that any of us who thought that they were going to have a good season could be so wrong. I don't know that any of us had ever felt that. Certainly Mike had never felt something like this, but we hadn't either as people that go out to those practices. We hadn't seen a group represent one way and then play another to the degree in which they failed. So I think that everybody will be, including the head coach and all of the players and those of us at these practices, sort of reticent to make grand proclamations. I don't think you're going to see that. I think you're going to see a lot of, I really like Deuce Robinson. Looks like physically he could make a difference in these games. We'll see.
Right.
I mean, at 6'5", 220 pounds, he runs well. He's a willing blocker. That should translate. We'll see.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of how we're going to say it, right?
That should and will see. The idea, too, he's catching everything. Oh, my God, he's catching everything. That's going to scare people away to no end. And it should. It should. Kyle Morlock had one of the great fall camps you'll ever see.
He did.
He really did. It happened.
Really did.
It was a thing. And then the games happened.
I hate it for him because I think that kind of thing snowballs. I saw a lot of that during the course of the season with guys. I think the early season failures snowballed into something that turned into an avalanche. And I talk about the effect of those kinds of things. And you can watch it happen at every level of sport. You can see it in individual sports and you can see it in team sports alike. In an individual sport, I'll give you an example. For once, I'll deviate from golf. A guy can have a great serve. He could have a dominant serve, and it could be the catalyst for his success. Now, obviously, if you're a professional tennis player, you have ground strokes. You have the ability to create angles. You have the intelligence to set people up. You really are formidable in every aspect, but your serve could be the reason that you are separated from other players. If all of a sudden your first serve percentage falls off a cliff and you can no longer consistently get an overpowering serve across, then all of a sudden you are a shell of yourself and you begin searching for other answers. And I think to some extent with Mike and with the players last year, these practices, they all look so good. Go all the way back to the Georgia Tech game, Tom. Go all the way back to the drop screen pass. That is set up so perfectly. Do you not think to some extent that affected Cam?
Yeah. Oh, how could it not? And you think about all the things that led up to that moment, that you don't choose to have Jalen Lucas in that situation. You don't choose to have Toafili catching that pass. That you do put in your true freshman when you've got 3 or 4 guys between that you would think would be more qualified in that moment to have the moment. There's a lot that goes into that one play. And you're right, because it snowballs not just for Cam Davis from a personal confidence standpoint moving forward, which that's your question. And I think the answer is unequivocally yes. But then also the drive is short-circuited. And now you see that you can bleed as an offense. And now there might be doubt creeping in. And that's what everything was from that drive moving forward, was just a whole bunch of doubt. And as short of a couple of excellent throws by DJU on 4th down, you saw a team that was totally unsure of itself from that point moving forward for the rest of the season. It never got better.
Yeah, and then they got exploited with their lack of certain physical tools. The offensive line ended up getting exploited. I think the biggest failure for Mike this past year was somehow maybe either believing Alex and his assessment of what that group collectively was going to be, or maybe not being able to see for yourself that this was not as formidable as you thought it was. Like, you went all in on a quarterback that really required you to have an elite offensive line. And you would only do that if you thought it was. So to me, That's another thing that would shake you to your core. It really is.
Well, this is where practice has to change. I think we just defined the reason why practice has to change. Practice was such that you could not detect that there was a problem over the
Yes.
course of a month leading up to the game.
Yeah.
You were confirming what you believed through camp, and frankly, the offensive line performed adequately through camp. In fall camp, you saw enough success where you thought, look, they're not going to be as good as their predecessors, but I mean, they're moving the ball against a decent defensive front. Actually, excuse me, at the time, what we were thinking, a very good defensive front. They're moving the ball with some, degree of consistency, but they couldn't detect it. And if they did, they weren't telling anybody. And this is where I believe that they didn't see it coming. Usually a coach wants to get the word out there, or an assistant or a coordinator wants to get the word out there like, well, we got real problems here. Like they want to give you an early detection that, hey, when we get over to Dublin, we're not sure what the hell we're going to see. Usually you will get that from a coach at some point in camp. They didn't see it coming, so what they're going to need is a practice regimen that will allow them to detect real problems that they can anticipate and fix before they turn into this avalanche.
It has to be revelatory. And, becoming a more physical team is really a high priority. Florida State was not physical, was not a bully in any way on either side of the ball. And that you can't win big games being passive, and you can't win a season without being a very physical. I don't think there are too many teams that have a lot of success. If we think about what remains in the playoff right now in college football, these games we're going to watch. I mean, what is Notre Dame if not physical? I mean, their whole team and their whole modus operandi is predicated on the run. They run the football. And Freeman, I'll give a ton of credit to. This is a team that is going to play a physical style of defense, and they are going to stick to the running game. The win against Indiana doesn't mean as much because Indiana's not very good, but what does mean something is how it happened. They had, 34 carries for almost 200 yards. Well, one of those carries is a 90-something yard touchdown run, which means the other 33 didn't amount to a whole hell of a lot, at least in terms of per carry average. But that's why you continue to run the ball, is because one of them is going to hit. One of them is going to hit. It's going to change everything about the game. It also forces defenses to come up and tackle and tackle and tackle, and then you set something else up.
Well, and it's also, you're wearing people down. You think about Sunday night's game in the pros between Atlanta and Washington. That second half, Washington has the ball for all but a minute in the third quarter. Washington has the ball deep into the fourth quarter. You don't think that their possession in the second half had a lot to do with how easily they went down the field in overtime against the gas defense? If you are of the mindset that Marcus Freeman is, or Boise State is going to be, or what Kenny Dillingham is going to do, I mean, you're going to have to prove, if you're Texas, they probably will, but you're going to have to prove that you can stop the run. But I'm not going to bail you out. And I think that's the thing that we're looking forward to most here for us offensively, is we may have to pivot off of the run because we can't consistently get what we want out of it against a really good opponent. That could happen to us next year. But we're not going to pivot off of it before you prove that you can stop it. Right. You're going to have to prove it first.
Yeah. I certainly believe that means the practices will become, as we were just describing, more revelatory, in that I think that what Tony White wants to do and how he wants to play, combined with what the offensive philosophy is going to be for Florida State, means you're going to see a much more physical practice. Because to arrive at the place where you can run the ball and have the mindset that you can run the ball against anybody can only happen through running the ball in practice at full speed. That's what's going to happen. And the same way about defensive toughness.
Can we have a New Year's resolution together that if we don't like the toughness level, the physicality level of practice you got to give it most of spring camp, probably because if they do it, let's just say they do it traditionally, it didn't happen this way in 2024. But if they do it like they did the previous seasons, you're going to have 3 or 4 practices. You get a week of spring break, and then you come back. Man, that's not fair. You're going to need to get into practice 4 or 5 on the other side of spring break if they do it that way. But my New Year's resolution is if they don't change the way they practice, we need to sound bells and say, like, man, this is interesting. They're not, doesn't seem like they're allowing the pads to pop as much as we thought they were going to.
Well, I certainly will no longer just hint at it. I mean, I hinted at it. You know I did, and I said it to you in private, but that doesn't count. That doesn't count. I needed to say it on the air more consistently. And
well,
I did. That's a
it
lesson
had worked. It had worked. That was the thing. You know, you had people who were mature enough to handle their business on the side, so therefore you didn't get burned for it because you parlayed into, look how fresh they were down the stretch in 2023.
Yeah,
they were one of the freshest fronts defensively because of two reasons. Probably the way they practice, but certainly with the rotation. They looked at that Louisville game. It looked like a team that was in midseason form and one that was just, I mean, they were beaten to hell. So there's a value to it, but you can't, I mean, good God, we were soft as tissue paper last year.
Oh, yeah. No. That can't, I can take an 8-4, 7-5 season if the team is really tough and plays physical. I'll live with it. That changes everything about what you can become moving forward. We'll come back, wrap it up. Jeff Cameron Show, 93.3 Real Talk Radio, Warchant TV. I say wrap it up. Well, we got another hour for you. The best of is coming up, but this is the last fresh hour of the year. Rounding out the hour, we are off tomorrow for New Year's Day. We hope all of you have a wonderful New Year's Eve. Stay safe out there. It goes without saying, but I'll say it anyhow. And hopefully, if you had a bad year, I hope this next one is much better. And if you had a great year, take some time to reflect on that, ponder what that means, and utilize whatever it was that you learned from that. I don't even know how to say about my year. I think this was a year of, for at least, certainly it was an eye-opening experience on the air with what we had to deal with on a daily basis. But it was a reminder too of how much I love my job, because if you can be as bitterly disappointed in your university and your program as we were, while also having to assess it professionally in the way that we did on a daily basis, and be brutally disappointed in that realm too, and still like to go to work and like to do your job, then you got a good job. You got a good job, because you could not have failed much worse than they did over there. And yet every day I was still excited to come in and talk about it.
I'm going to be real honest with you right now. This is a hell of a year to have a third hour added back into the fold, because could have used a little bit more. They could have given us more. We were poking them with a stick. Come on, guys, something. And we're going to keep with DJU out there. Okay, all right. Like, good freaking Lord. This was a toughie. But if we could do 3 hours with 2 wins, oh, buddy, hey, we are geared to be able to do anything we want forevermore.
Well, I'll give you a little New Year's Eve prediction. Florida State will be better than 2-10 next year.
Oh, you know what? Even though I know that's what's going to be, it still feels comforting. It did something.
There you go. Just take that, wrap yourself in that, take that cloak, and just roll with that, guys. There you go. I guarantee you, Florida State will go better than 2 wins, 10 losses next season. When we're done writing the W's and L's in the ledger, you will see more than 2 in the W column.
It's funny. The thing I'm looking forward to right now in this moment the most is the vision of regional play on a Friday. You, for some reason, are in a close game because everybody's got an ace. You're up 2-0, but the opponent has 2 on, 2 out, runners on the corners. Everybody rises to their feet in Hauser, and Arnold rises to the moment, and he gets that giant strikeout, and the crowd thunderously gives him the ovation that he deserves, and he runs back to the dugout with fist raised, and you think, okay, I think we're over it now, and you tack on a couple of runs. That's the moment I can't wait to see. I'm looking forward to some baseball here soon, and it's only 6 weeks away.
Well, and as you correctly pointed out recently, and we've kind of touched on off and on over the years, because it's been happening, it's been a trend that's been moving in this direction for some time, but it's absolutely true now. It's a blanketly true statement that college baseball resembles pro baseball now more than it ever has in its entire existence. So when you're going to see high-level college baseball, unfortunately, like we see with the University of Florida, and like we see obviously these days with us, and so many other teams, the ACC actually plays good college baseball, everybody. It's one of the few things that they're holding on to. you are seeing something that is akin to high-level minor league baseball. You are seeing AA to some extent, maybe even a little bit better than that in a lot of areas. And so I'm with you in that, Tom. I'm really looking forward to that as well. Hey, listen, everybody, Happy New Year. Next hour is recorded, but much love to all of you. We're back live with you on Thursday. We won't get overly emotional here. Just big thanks, big ups to all of you for hanging there with us. We really appreciate you. And I wish you a very happy New Year. Tommy, you know I love you. I'll see you in a little bit. Happy New Year, brother. And we'll enjoy that, playing some golf together. It should be good. I expect you to bring the transfusions.
one more birdie at minimum today before we get into 2025. Let's do it.
There we go. Be good, everybody.